They all sent the same final text message before disappearing. Something's not right here. 11 different people, spanning decades, identical last words. What were they seeing in those ancient mountains that made them all say exactly that? The Appalachian Trail stretches across America like a green ribbon of wilderness, winding through 14 states from Georgia to Maine. Over 2,200 miles of rugged terrain, dense forests that haven't changed much since colonial times, mountains that scrape the sky, and valleys so deep they seem to swallow sound itself. Every year, more than 3 million people visit this trail. Some come for day hikes, others plan weekend camping trips. But then there are the ambitious ones, the thru hikers who attempt to walk the entire distance in one go. These folks quit their jobs, leave their comfortable lives behind, and head into the wilderness with nothing but a backpack and determination. Here's where things get interesting, though. Only about 25% of thru hikers actually finish the whole trail. Makes sense, right? We're talking about months of walking through some of the most challenging terrain on the East Coast. Your feet hurt constantly. Weather changes without warning. Bears roam the same paths you're sleeping on. But that's not the only reason people don't complete their journey. The Appalachian Trail has a darker side that most hiking guides don't advertise. Those wild forests and towering mountains create pockets of isolation so complete that cell phones become useless pieces of plastic. GPS signals bounce off rock faces and get lost in thick tree cover. One wrong turn, one missed trail marker, and suddenly you're in a world where nobody can hear you scream for help. Search and rescue teams know this reality all too well. They get called out regularly for hikers who vanished without a trace. Sometimes they find people within hours, dehydrated but alive. Other times, the searches stretch into days, then weeks. The lucky ones turn up embarrassed but breathing. The unlucky ones become statistics. Then there are the cases that keep rescue coordinators awake at night. Hikers who disappear under circumstances that make no sense. People who vanish from well-marked sections of trail that thousands walk safely every year. Experienced outdoors enthusiasts who know better than to wander off into unmarked wilderness, yet somehow do exactly that. The mountains don't discriminate. Age doesn't matter. Experience level becomes irrelevant when nature decides to test you. A 66-year-old grandmother can vanish just as completely as a young adventure seeker. Weather patterns shift faster than you can adjust your plans. What starts as a beautiful morning can turn into a life-threatening situation by afternoon. Local rangers have seen it all. Hikers who packed designer gear worth thousands of dollars but forgot to bring a compass. Families who split up on the trail because someone wanted to take photos at a scenic overlook. Solo adventurers who told nobody their exact route, thinking independence meant complete isolation from the outside world. Well, the trail has a way of humbling even the most prepared visitors. Every missing person case starts the same way. Someone fails to show up at a planned meeting point. A worried family member calls authorities. Rangers check the trail registers, hoping to find recent signatures that might indicate direction of travel. Then comes the systematic search, helicopters scanning from above, ground teams combing through underbrush, dogs following scent trails that sometimes lead nowhere. But here's what makes the Appalachian Trail particularly challenging for search operations: the sheer scope of wilderness involved. We're not talking about a small state park with clearly defined boundaries. This trail system covers terrain so vast that a person could wander for weeks without encountering another human being. Side trails branch off the main route like arteries, leading deeper into backcountry areas that appear on few maps. And the weird part is how many of these disappearances happen in areas that should be safe. Popular sections of trail where hikers pass by regularly. Well-maintained paths with clear markings and established camping areas. Places where getting lost should be nearly impossible, yet people vanish anyway. The missing hiker reports pile up in ranger stations across 14 states. Each file tells a similar story with different details. Someone walked into the woods and never walked out. Families left with questions that have no answers. Search teams left wondering how a human being can simply evaporate in broad daylight on a marked trail. Some cases get solved eventually. Bodies found months or years later, far from where anyone thought to look. Medical examiners piece together final hours from scattered evidence. Families get closure, even when the news isn't what they hoped to hear. Others remain complete mysteries decades later. The trail keeps its secrets well, hidden among ancient trees and forgotten hollows, where sunlight barely penetrates the forest canopy. Each unsolved case adds another layer to the mountain folklore, another cautionary tale whispered around campfires. What happened to these missing hikers reveals something unsettling about the wilderness we think we understand. Geraldine Inchworm Largay was 66 years old when she started her dream hike on the Appalachian Trail in 2013. She'd picked up the nickname Inchworm because, well, she wasn't exactly setting any speed records, but that was fine by her. She had retired, and this adventure was about taking time to enjoy the journey. Her plan seemed solid enough. Walk sections of the trail through Maine, while her husband George drove along, meeting her at road crossings every few days. They'd done this kind of tag team hiking before. George would drop her off, drive to the next meeting point, and wait. Simple system that had worked perfectly on previous trips. July 22nd started like any other hiking day. Geraldine shouldered her pack and headed into the Maine wilderness near the Poplar Ridge lean-to. The weather was decent. Her spirits were high. She sent George a text message that morning, letting him know she was making good progress and everything was going according to plan. That text would be her last communication with the outside world. When Geraldine didn't show up at their planned meeting spot on Route 27, George knew something was wrong. His wife might hike slowly, but she was reliable. She always made their meetups. Hours passed, then a full day. George contacted the authorities, and soon the Maine Warden Service launched what would become one of the largest search operations in the state's history. The search effort was massive. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Ground teams combed through thick forest. Volunteers joined professional searchers, covering mile after mile of rugged terrain. They brought in tracking dogs. They checked every shelter, every side trail, every possible route Geraldine might have taken. But here's the thing about the Maine wilderness: it doesn't give up its secrets easily. Dense forests stretch for miles without roads or cell towers. Thick canopy blocks aerial views. Even experienced hikers can lose the trail when fog rolls in or when blazes are hard to spot. Days turned into weeks. The search teams kept looking, but finding one person in thousands of acres of forest is like finding a needle in a haystack, except the haystack is filled with bears, steep ravines, and vegetation so thick you can barely see 10 feet ahead. 2 years passed. 2 full years of wondering what happened to Inchworm. Then, in October 2015, a surveyor working in the area made a grim discovery. About 3 miles from the Appalachian Trail, hidden in dense woods, he found human remains along with camping gear and personal items. The Maine State Police confirmed what everyone feared: they'd found Geraldine Largay. The weird part is how close she'd been to the trail the whole time. 3 miles doesn't sound like much, but in thick Maine forest, it might as well be 300. She'd gotten turned around somehow, probably while looking for a private spot to use the bathroom. It happens more often than people think, but Geraldine's story gets even more heartbreaking. Investigators found her journal and discovered she'd survived for 23 days after getting lost. 23 days. She'd set up her tent and tried to signal for help. She'd rationed her food carefully. She'd written messages to her family, telling them she loved them and wasn't in pain. The journal revealed she'd heard the search helicopters flying overhead, but couldn't get their attention through the thick tree cover. She'd tried building signal fires. She'd attempted to find her way back to the trail multiple times, but only got more disoriented. Eventually, exposure and lack of food took their toll. What makes this case particularly haunting is how prepared Geraldine actually was. She had proper gear. She knew basic survival skills. She'd hiked sections of the Appalachian Trail before, yet none of that mattered once she stepped off the main path and couldn't find her way back. The investigation showed no foul play, no mysterious circumstances, just a grandmother who took a wrong turn in an unforgiving landscape and couldn't correct her mistake. Sometimes the simplest explanation is the most terrifying one. Geraldine's disappearance changed how many people think about solo hiking. Her case became a textbook example of how quickly things can go wrong, even for experienced hikers with good intentions and decent preparation. Then there's this unsettling detail. Search teams had actually come within a few hundred yards of her campsite during the initial search, but never spotted her tent through the dense vegetation. The forest had hidden her so completely that trained searchers walked right past. But Geraldine Largay's case, tragic as it is, at least provided answers. Her family knew what happened. They could grieve and find some closure. Other Appalachian Trail disappearances haven't been so clear-cut. Some mysteries from these mountains leave investigators scratching their heads for decades, with questions that refuse to be answered. The summer of 1981 started like any other for Polly Melton. She was 20 years old, full of life, and ready for an adventure in the Great Smoky Mountains. What should have been a simple hiking trip with friends turned into one of the most baffling disappearances the Appalachian Trail has ever seen. Polly wasn't hiking alone that day. She had companions with her, which makes her vanishing act even more puzzling. The group was making their way through the popular trails of Great Smoky Mountains National Park when something went terribly wrong. According to her friends, Polly decided to walk ahead of the group. Maybe she was feeling energetic, maybe she wanted some quiet time. Whatever the reason, she picked up her pace and disappeared around a bend in the trail. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. Her friends weren't immediately worried. Hikers often spread out on trails, especially when some people move faster than others. They figured they'd catch up to Polly at the next clearing or rest stop. But minutes turned into an hour. Then another hour passed. The weird part, they never found her waiting anywhere along the trail. When Polly's friends finally reached areas where the trail opened up, she wasn't there. They backtracked, calling her name through the dense forest. Nothing. No response. No sign of where she might have gone. It was like she had simply evaporated into the mountain air. The search began almost immediately. Park rangers, local law enforcement, and volunteer search teams combed through miles of wilderness. They checked every side trail, every creek bed, every possible route Polly could have taken. Makes sense, right? A young woman doesn't just disappear in broad daylight on a well-traveled trail. But here's where the mystery gets even stranger. The searchers found absolutely nothing. No clothing, no backpack, no footprints leading off the main trail. It was as if Polly had never existed at all. Search dogs were brought in, hoping to pick up her scent. They came up empty too. Well, her friends started sharing more details about Polly's state of mind before the trip. They mentioned she seemed healthy and physically capable of handling the hike. She wasn't inexperienced or unprepared. However, some of her friends noticed she had personal worries weighing on her mind. They never specified exactly what those worries were, but they suggested Polly was dealing with some kind of emotional stress. Could those personal problems have played a role in her disappearance? Did Polly intentionally leave the trail? The questions multiplied faster than answers. Then there's the location factor. Great Smoky Mountains National Park isn't exactly remote wilderness. It's one of the most visited national parks in America, with millions of tourists every year. The trails where Polly disappeared see hundreds of hikers daily during summer months. How does someone vanish without a single witness seeing anything unusual? Investigators interviewed every hiker they could find who had been in the area that day. Nobody remembered seeing a young woman walking alone or acting strangely. Nobody heard calls for help. The silence was deafening. Months passed without any breaks in the case. Polly's family kept pushing for more searches, more investigations, more answers. They distributed flyers with her photo throughout the region. Local newspapers ran stories about the missing hiker. Television stations picked up the story. Still nothing. The theories started flying. Some people believed Polly had an accident and fell into a hidden ravine where searchers couldn't find her. Others thought she might have encountered wildlife. Though bear attacks are rare in the Smokies, a few suggested she could have been the victim of foul play, but there was zero evidence supporting that theory. But why would an experienced search team miss obvious clues? These weren't amateur volunteers stumbling around in the woods. Professional rangers and trained search specialists spent days methodically covering every inch of the area. They knew what to look for and where to look for it. Another puzzling detail emerged during the investigation. The section of trail where Polly disappeared wasn't particularly dangerous or confusing. There weren't steep cliffs or rushing rivers that could cause a fatal accident. The path was well marked and relatively easy to follow. An average hiker would have to make a deliberate decision to leave the designated route. Years have passed since 1981, and Polly Melton's case remains completely unsolved. No remains have ever been discovered. No new evidence has surfaced, no witnesses have come forward with fresh information. Her disappearance is still listed as an open case, but investigators have exhausted virtually every lead. The mystery haunts experienced hikers who know the area well. They understand how difficult it would be for someone to simply vanish without leaving any trace whatsoever. Yet that's exactly what happened to Polly Melton on what should have been an ordinary summer day. Her case wouldn't be the last time the Appalachian Trail would see someone leave behind a cryptic message before disappearing forever. When Derek Luking's car was discovered at the Cataract Falls trailhead in the Great Smoky Mountains on March 9, 2012, park rangers knew they had a problem. The vehicle sat empty in the parking lot, keys nowhere to be found. But here's the thing that made everyone's skin crawl. Derek had left behind a handwritten note that read simply, "Don't try to follow me." Those 6 words would haunt search teams for weeks. What kind of person leaves a message like that? The note wasn't angry or desperate, it was calm, methodical, almost polite, if you think about it. Like Derek was asking people to respect his privacy while he walked into the wilderness to disappear forever. Derek wasn't some random guy having a bad day either. The 24-year-old had been struggling with grief that most people his age never experience. His grandfather had died recently, and those close to Derek said the loss hit him harder than anyone expected. Grandfathers and grandsons share a special bond, right? Well, Derek's world seemed to crumble without his. The weeks leading up to his disappearance painted a troubling picture. Derek stopped showing up to his job without explanation. He quit calling family members back. Friends described him as withdrawn, like he was slowly fading away even before he actually vanished. His behavior screamed that something was seriously wrong, but nobody anticipated he'd walk into the mountains and never come back. Then there's the timing of his disappearance, which makes everything more unsettling. March in the Smokies means unpredictable weather. Temperatures can drop below freezing at night, even when the days feel warm. Rain turns to sleet without warning. The trails become slippery and dangerous. If Derek planned to harm himself, he picked conditions that would make survival nearly impossible. Search and rescue teams mobilized quickly after Derek's car was found. They combed through dense forests and rocky terrain for days. Helicopters circled overhead while ground crews followed every possible trail Derek might have taken. The Smokies cover over 500,000 acres of wilderness. Finding one person in that vast expanse is like searching for a needle in a haystack the size of Rhode Island. But here's what bothered investigators most. Derek seemed to vanish completely. No footprints, no torn clothing on branches, no signs of struggle or accident. It was as if he'd simply evaporated into the mountain air. Even experienced search teams admit this level of disappearance is unusual. Most missing hikers leave some trace behind, even if it's just a candy wrapper or a broken shoelace. The "Don't follow me" note became the center of endless speculation. Some people interpreted it as a suicide message, Derek's way of saying goodbye while asking for privacy in his final moments. Others wondered if he'd planned to start a new life somewhere else, maybe assuming a different identity far from his grief and problems. The note could mean anything, really. Derek's family held on to hope longer than most people would. They organized their own search parties when official efforts wound down. They posted flyers throughout the region. They contacted psychics, checked homeless shelters, and followed up on every possible sighting reported by well-meaning strangers. Grief makes people do desperate things, and Derek's disappearance left his loved ones grasping for answers that never came. What makes Derek's case particularly haunting is how deliberate everything seemed. This wasn't a hiker who got lost or made a bad decision in a moment of panic. Derek appears to have planned his disappearance carefully. He drove to a specific trailhead, left his note, and walked into the wilderness with purpose. That level of intentionality suggests Derek knew exactly what he was doing. The psychological aspect of Derek's disappearance raises uncomfortable questions about mental health and isolation on the trail. When someone is dealing with severe depression or grief, the vast emptiness of the mountains can feel appealing. The silence, the solitude, the sense that you're completely alone with your thoughts. For some people in Derek's mental state, that isolation becomes a permanent escape rather than temporary healing. Years have passed since Derek walked into those mountains, and his fate remains unknown. His case file stays open, but active searching stopped long ago. Park rangers occasionally receive reports of old bones or abandoned campsites, but none have led to Derek. The Smokies keep their secrets well, and Derek Luking became another mystery swallowed by the ancient forests. The strangest part? Derek's disappearance wasn't even the most disturbing case to emerge from the Appalachian Trail. While his story suggests someone who chose to vanish, other cases point to something far more sinister. situations where hikers disappeared against their will, leaving behind evidence of foul play that would shock even seasoned investigators. Derek Luking wasn't the only one whose story would end in tragedy on the Appalachian Trail. While Derek simply vanished without a trace, another hiker's fate would be discovered in the most horrifying way possible. Scott Lilly's case proves that sometimes the wilderness isn't the only danger lurking in the mountains. Scott was 21 years old and full of dreams about conquering the entire Appalachian Trail. Like thousands of other hikers, he wanted to join that exclusive club of thru hikers who could say they'd walked all 2,200 miles. The trail represented freedom, adventure, and a chance to prove something to himself. What he found instead was something no one could have prepared him for. July 31st, 2011 marked the last time anyone heard from Scott. He'd just finished climbing the Priest, a challenging mountain in Virginia that tests even experienced hikers. The Priest rises over 4,000 feet and demands respect from everyone who attempts its steep, rocky paths. Scott had conquered it successfully and was feeling good about his progress. But here's where Scott's story takes a darker turn than the typical missing hiker case. This wasn't about getting lost or making a wrong turn. This wasn't even about the weather or wild animals. When Scott's body was finally discovered near a trail shelter in Virginia, investigators quickly realized they weren't dealing with a typical hiking accident. The cause of death was homicide by suffocation. Someone had deliberately killed this young man who was simply trying to live his dream of hiking across America. Think about that for a moment. Scott had survived black bears, rattlesnakes, treacherous mountain passes, and brutal weather conditions. He'd navigated through some of the most challenging terrain on the East Coast. Yet what ultimately killed him was another human being. Trail shelters are supposed to be safe havens for hikers. These three-sided wooden structures dot the Appalachian Trail, providing weary travelers with protection from rain, snow, and wind. Hikers often share these spaces with complete strangers, creating temporary communities built on trust and mutual respect for the trail. Most of the time, this system works beautifully. Lifelong friendships form in these shelters. People share food, stories, and help each other through difficult times. Scott's murder shattered that sense of security. Suddenly, every hiker had to wonder if the person sleeping a few feet away might be dangerous. The trail community had always prided itself on looking out for one another, but Scott's death introduced a terrifying new variable into the equation. The investigation revealed frustrating dead ends at every turn. No clear motive emerged from the evidence. Scott wasn't robbed, only his gear and money remained untouched. He hadn't been involved in any known conflicts with other hikers. There were no signs of a struggle that might have started over shelter space or trail etiquette. The killing seemed random, which made it even more frightening. Investigators interviewed dozens of hikers who had been in the area around the time of Scott's death. They followed up on tips and potential leads. They analyzed every piece of evidence found at the scene. Despite all these efforts, Scott's killer has never been identified or caught. The case remains cold to this day. More than a decade later. What makes this case particularly unsettling is how it changed the entire dynamic of trail culture. Before Scott's murder, most hikers felt comfortable sharing shelters with strangers. The unwritten rules of trail life encouraged openness, generosity, and trust. Scott's death forced everyone to reconsider those assumptions. Some hikers started avoiding shelters altogether, preferring to camp alone in the woods despite the increased risks that isolation brings. Others began traveling in larger groups for safety, fundamentally changing the solitary nature that draws many people to long-distance hiking in the first place. The ripple effects of one violent act touched thousands of innocent hikers. Then there's the haunting reality that Scott's killer might still be out there. Was this a one-time crime of opportunity, or has this person struck again? Are there other unsolved cases along the trail that might be connected? These questions keep investigators and hikers awake at night, wondering if justice will ever be served. Scott's family continues to push for answers, but leads have grown cold over the years. The killer had the advantage of a transient population where people constantly move through the area and disappear into different states. By the time Scott's body was discovered, potential witnesses had scattered across hundreds of miles of trail. The tragedy serves as a grim reminder that evil can lurk anywhere, even in the most beautiful and seemingly peaceful places on Earth. While Scott's case represents the extreme end of trail dangers, it connects to a broader pattern of mysterious disappearances and unexplained incidents that plague America's most famous hiking route. But Scott's story isn't the only one that captivated national attention with its strange and disturbing details. Jacob Gray was only 18 years old when he vanished into thin air near Olympic National Park in April 2017. Fresh-faced and eager for adventure, Jacob had convinced his family to let him tackle a challenging mountain trail despite having almost zero hiking experience. What could go wrong, right? Well, everything. Jacob's story starts like many others. A young person looking for meaning, maybe some Instagram-worthy photos, and definitely an escape from everyday life. He wasn't technically on the Appalachian Trail, but his disappearance shares the same haunting patterns we've seen before. The mountains don't care which trail you're on when things go sideways. The weird part begins with Jacob's final day. Multiple witnesses spotted him at different locations along the trail, but their stories don't match up at all. One hiker swore they saw Jacob heading north toward Hurricane Ridge around noon. Another claimed he was walking south, away from the main trail, just an hour later. A park ranger insisted Jacob asked for directions to a completely different area altogether. How does someone appear in 3 different places within such a short time frame? Unless Jacob had mastered teleportation, something wasn't adding up. Then there's the phone call. Jacob managed to contact his mother that evening, telling her he was getting close to his destination. His voice sounded normal, no panic, no distress. He even joked about being hungry and wanting her famous lasagna when he got home. The call lasted 8 minutes. After hanging up, Jacob Gray was never heard from again. Search and rescue teams mobilized quickly this time, learning from past mistakes. They brought everything: helicopters, tracking dogs, thermal imaging equipment, and dozens of volunteers. The search covered over 135 square miles of rugged wilderness. They found absolutely nothing. Not his backpack, not his distinctive red jacket, not even a single footprint. But here's where things get really strange. 3 weeks into the search, investigators discovered Jacob's car wasn't where they initially thought. The vehicle had been moved from its original parking spot at the trailhead to a completely different location 2 miles away. Security cameras at the park entrance showed Jacob's car leaving the parking area the day after he disappeared. The problem? Jacob was already missing by then. Who moved his car and why? The case exploded across social media platforms, with amateur detectives offering theories ranging from logical to completely insane. Some suggested Jacob staged his own disappearance to escape family pressure about college. Others believed he encountered something or someone dangerous on the trail. The most outlandish theories involved everything from alien abduction to secret government experiments. National news crews descended on the small Washington town like hungry vultures. Jacob's face appeared on missing person posters from Seattle to Miami. His parents, Dave and Michelle Gray, held press conferences pleading for information. They offered a $30,000 reward for any credible leads about their son's whereabouts. The attention brought forward more witnesses with conflicting stories. A local fisherman claimed he saw Jacob hitchhiking on a highway 30 miles from the trail. A gas station clerk insisted Jacob bought snacks and energy drinks 2 days after his disappearance. Each lead sent search teams scrambling in new directions, burning through resources and hope. Let's not forget the evidence that actually made sense. Investigators found Jacob's credit card had been used twice after he vanished, once at an ATM in Port Angeles and again at a convenience store in Sequim. Security footage from both locations was mysteriously corrupted or missing. What are the odds? Jacob's cell phone provided the next puzzle piece. Digital forensics experts discovered his phone had pinged cell towers in 3 different states over the following month. The signals came from Oregon, California, and Nevada, places Jacob had never mentioned wanting to visit. His phone was either on an epic road trip without him, or something much stranger was happening. The FBI eventually joined the investigation, treating Jacob's case as a potential abduction rather than a simple hiking accident. They interviewed hundreds of people, analyzed phone records, and tracked down every possible lead. After 6 months of intensive investigation, they had more questions than answers. Dave and Michelle Gray never stopped searching. They organized volunteer search parties, hired private investigators, and consulted with psychics, anything that might bring their son home. The family spent their life savings chasing leads across multiple states. Their marriage couldn't survive the stress, ending in divorce 2 years later. Jacob Gray's disappearance remains unsolved today. His case file contains over 2,000 pages of reports, witness statements, and dead-end leads. The National Park Service lists him as a missing person, though many investigators privately believe he's no longer alive. The strange details surrounding Jacob's vanishing aren't unique, unfortunately. They're part of a troubling pattern affecting hikers across America's wilderness areas. What makes some people disappear without a trace, while others are found quickly? The answer might lie in understanding the hidden dangers that turn peaceful trails into something far more sinister. The wilderness doesn't care if you're a weekend warrior or a seasoned hiker. It'll humble you faster than you can check your GPS signal, which, by the way, probably disappeared 3 miles back. Here's the thing about the Appalachian Trail that guidebooks don't emphasize enough. Weather changes aren't just inconvenient, they're deadly. A sunny morning in the mountains can turn into a freezing nightmare by afternoon. The temperature drops about 3 degrees for every 1,000 feet you climb. Sounds manageable, right? Well, when you're already at 4,000 feet and climbing another 2,000, that's a 15-degree difference your body wasn't expecting. Add some wind and rain, and hypothermia becomes a real threat even in summer. But weather is just one piece of the puzzle. Let's talk about something more unsettling: the psychological factor. Spending weeks alone on the trail does strange things to your mind. Some hikers call it trail madness. Others just call it losing your grip on reality. Days blend together. You start talking to yourself more than you'd like to admit. Decision-making becomes harder when your brain is running on fumes and granola bars. The isolation hits different people in different ways. Geraldine Largay, remember her from earlier? She survived 23 days alone after getting lost. That's not just physical endurance. That's mental torture. Imagine being that close to rescue but never seeing another human being. The silence in those deep woods isn't peaceful. It's oppressive. Then there's the gear problem. You'd be shocked how many people hit the trail with equipment that belongs in a suburban backyard, not the wilderness. Cotton clothes that turn deadly when wet, boots that haven't been broken in, maps from the 1990s, GPS devices with dead batteries. The trail doesn't offer second chances for poor preparation. Navigation sounds simple until you're actually doing it. Trail markers can be damaged, covered by snow, or simply missing. Fog rolls in and suddenly you can't see 10 feet ahead. Multiple paths branch off in different directions, and none of them look particularly official. Even experienced hikers admit they've taken wrong turns that added hours or days to their journey. The terrain itself presents constant challenges. Loose rocks that shift under your weight, streams that were ankle-deep yesterday but are now raging torrents, tree roots that grab your feet like nature's own tripwires. One wrong step can mean a twisted ankle, a broken bone, or worse. When you're miles from the nearest road, a simple injury becomes a life-threatening emergency. Cell service is basically a myth in most remote sections. Those emergency apps on your phone, useless when you can't get a signal. Satellite communicators are becoming more popular, but plenty of hikers still venture out assuming they'll be able to call for help if needed. That assumption has cost lives. Mental health issues don't take a vacation just because you're on the trail. Depression, anxiety, and other conditions can actually worsen in isolation. Some people hit the trail hoping to find themselves or escape personal problems. Sometimes they find more than they'd bargained for. Derek Luking's case shows how grief and mental distress can lead to tragic decisions in the wilderness. Wildlife encounters add another layer of risk. Black bears are common along much of the trail. They're usually not aggressive, but a surprised bear is a dangerous bear. Venomous snakes hide in rocky areas. Even smaller animals like raccoons can carry diseases. Proper food storage isn't just about keeping your dinner safe. It's about not attracting unwanted visitors to your campsite. Water sources present hidden dangers too. That crystal-clear mountain stream might look pristine, but it could contain parasites that'll leave you dehydrated and weak. Giardia and other waterborne illnesses have derailed countless hiking attempts. When you're already pushing your body to its limits, getting sick can spiral into something much worse. The trail community talks a lot about trail angels, helpful people who assist hikers. But what about the opposite? Not everyone you meet in remote areas has good intentions. Scott Lilly's murder proves that even the hiking community isn't immune to violence. Solo hikers, especially, become vulnerable targets. Weather, gear, terrain, isolation, health, these factors don't operate independently. They compound each other. A minor equipment failure during bad weather while you're already tired and stressed can cascade into a life-threatening situation. The mountains don't grade on a curve, and the weird part is many people who go missing had experience. They knew the risks. They'd hiked before. But the wilderness has a way of presenting new challenges just when you think you've seen it all. These risk factors help explain why people vanish, but they don't solve the mysteries. Understanding what went wrong requires looking at how modern technology and new safety approaches are changing the game. The question is whether these improvements are enough to prevent future tragedies. After every tragedy on the Appalachian Trail, something valuable emerges from the darkness. The missing hikers and unsolved mysteries haven't just become cold case files gathering dust in police stations, they've sparked real changes that could save your life if you ever decide to tackle those mountain paths. Rangers didn't just sit around after Geraldine Largay's death. Her case became a wake-up call that echoed through every trail office from Georgia to Maine. Think about it, she survived 23 days alone in the wilderness, writing in her journal until the very end. That kind of determination deserved better preparation, better technology, better support systems. Personal locator beacons became the new must-have gear. These little devices aren't your typical cell phone that dies when you need it most. They send satellite signals directly to rescue teams, even from the deepest valleys where cell towers can't reach. The technology existed during Geraldine's hike, but hardly anyone knew about it. Now, trail organizations practically shout about them from every mountaintop. But here's where things get interesting and a bit controversial. Some old-school hikers hate the idea of carrying electronic safety nets. They argue it ruins the authentic wilderness experience. Real hikers don't need gadgets, they say. Well, tell that to the families still waiting for answers about their missing loved ones. Search and rescue operations have gone high-tech in ways that would make Derek Luking's case look completely different today. Drones now scan areas that used to take ground teams days to cover. Thermal imaging cameras spot heat signatures through dense forest canopy. GPS tracking systems create digital breadcrumbs that make it nearly impossible for experienced teams to miss clues. The Virginia case involving Scott Lilly's murder pushed authorities to install more security measures around popular trail shelters. Camera systems appeared at key locations. Emergency call boxes sprouted up at major trail junctions. Some people joke that the Appalachian Trail is starting to look like a suburban park with all the technology, but nobody's laughing when lives get saved. Then there's the mental health angle that nobody wanted to talk about before. Derek's troubling note and his behavior before disappearing opened conversations about psychological support for long-distance hikers. Spending months alone in the wilderness can mess with your head in unexpected ways. Trail angels, volunteers who help hikers, now receive basic training to recognize when someone might be struggling with more than just sore feet and empty water bottles. Group hiking incentives started appearing everywhere. Hostels began offering discounts for hiking partners. Online forums dedicated entire sections to matching solo hikers with compatible companions. The buddy system isn't just for elementary school field trips anymore, it's becoming standard practice for serious trail adventures. Weather alert systems got major upgrades too. Remember how quickly mountain weather can turn deadly? Modern hikers receive real-time storm warnings directly to their devices. Lightning strike predictions, flash flood alerts, temperature drop warnings, all delivered with enough advance notice to find shelter or change routes. Emergency response times have improved dramatically, but not without controversy. Helicopter rescues cost thousands of dollars, and some states started billing rescued hikers for the expense. Critics argue this discourages people from calling for help when they really need it. Others say it prevents unnecessary rescue calls from people who just got tired or scared. Training programs multiplied after analyzing why so many disappearances involved basic navigation errors. Map and compass courses fill up months in advance. Wilderness first aid certifications become common requirements for hiking groups. Even smartphone apps now include offline topographic maps and emergency signal features. The families of missing hikers became powerful advocates for safety improvements. They lobby for increased funding for search and rescue operations. They push for mandatory safety equipment requirements in certain trail sections. Their persistence keeps these cases in public attention long after news coverage fades. But technology can't solve everything. The mysterious circumstances surrounding some disappearances remind us that human behavior remains unpredictable. Someone determined to vanish will find ways around the best safety systems. Someone making poor decisions in a moment of panic might ignore all their high-tech gear. Trail maintenance crews now focus more on clear signage and obvious path markings. Getting lost shouldn't happen because of confusing trail markers or overgrown paths. Regular maintenance schedules ensure that crucial signs remain visible and accurate. Education campaigns target inexperienced hikers who underestimate the trail's dangers. Social media spreads safety messages alongside beautiful hiking photos. Gear shops require basic safety discussions before selling certain equipment. These efforts aim to prevent tragedies before they start. The missing hikers' stories continue echoing through every safety briefing, every gear recommendation, every rescue protocol update. Their disappearances weren't meaningless, they became catalysts for changes that protect future adventurers. Yet despite all these improvements and technological advances, the Appalachian Trail keeps its wild character, and sometimes people still vanish without explanation, leaving behind only questions and the eternal mystery of what really happens in those vast, untamed mountains.